So welcome, bienvenidos to Writing Grief, Writing Growth. Authors speak on creativity during difficult times. A reading and panel discussion co-hosted by the McKinney Committee at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and the English Department at the State University of New York at Albany, in collaboration with SUNY's Art Museum and the New York State Writers Institute. Our special guests, our panelists today are Amina Gautier, McCully Brown, and Susan Nguyen. Each author will read from their work to be followed by a panel discussion on writing about grief and loss, writing through stressful experiences, and the benefits of creative practices during difficult times. There will also be time for audience questions through the chat. This event aims to support student wellness across the Capital Region, to build a strong literary community across campuses, celebrate emergent writers, and promote professionalization in the arts and humanities. The event will culminate with announcements of the student winners of RPI's 2021 McKinney Awards and recognitions of recent UAlbany student achievements. My name is Skye Annika. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Communication and Media at Rensselaer Polytechnic, as well as the McKinney Chair. I will be your director of ceremonies this afternoon. And to begin, a few logistics. For accessibility purposes, note that this event is being recorded and an audio transcription will be automatically generated. Momentarily, I will also provide a document with these comments and the presenter bios in the Zoom chat, as the transcription is only available after the event. For those of you lucky enough not to have spent the last year on endless Zoom, I will offer a few tips. In the top right-hand corner of your screen, you will find the option to change your view so you can take in this strong cross-campus community that has shown up and is still showing up to support the arts and humanities this afternoon. However, once we get started, I recommend choosing the speaker view, which will showcase the presenters for you. Please keep yourselves muted through the majority of the presentation to avoid any disruptions. The mute button is located in the bottom left portion of your screen. We will hold our typical applause to the end of the ceremony when we will announce the winners of the annual McKinney Writing and Electronic Arts Contest at Rensselaer and celebrate recent UAlbany student achievements. While the awards and achievements slideshow plays, I encourage you to applaud loudly to support our exceptional students. But to just show support for our readers this afternoon, please use Zoom's reaction feature. Feel free to play with that now, just for fun. It's located in the bottom right corner of your screen, so you can silently applaud our readers. That way we avoid Zoom confusion. At any point during the ceremony, though, I invite you to leave questions for the panelists in the chat, and our moderator will voice your questions for you during the Q&A portion of the event. So again, we ask you hold your audible applause until the slideshow at the end of the ceremony. Finally, I have to thank the McKinney Annual Student Contest judges for their volunteer work in choosing student works. We're so appreciative, and our generous sponsors as well. Support for this event has been provided by Rensselaer's Union, the annual McKinney Writing Contest and Reading, and School of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences, as well as UAlbany's Department of English, University Art Museum, the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, and the New York State Writers Institute. So I hope you can hear how many people came together to make this event happen. And of course, our wonderful panelists for being here. So to continue, a few brief remarks about Rensselaer's McKinney Committee from Jim Zappin, professor in the Department of Communication and Media at Rensselaer. Jim Zappin regularly teaches courses in Introduction to Literature and Fiction from Film to the Internet, and has served as a member of the McKinney Committee for the past 10 years.
Thank you, Skye. The McKinney Writing Contest and Awards Ceremony are distinguished traditions at Rensselaer, originating in a major monetary donation and sustained by a long-standing and productive partnership with the New York State Writers Institute. The writing contest is supported by the Mary A. Earl McKinney Endowment, established in 1941 by Samuel P. McKinney, a Rensselaer graduate of the class of 1884, and by subsequent donations, most recently major gifts from Dr. Edward Leroy Long, Jr., a Rensselaer graduate and winner of first prize in the writing contest of 1944. The awards ceremony is also a longstanding tradition, created and sustained by communication and media professor Merrill D. Whitburn in partnership with Director Paul Grundle and Program Fellow Mark A. Koplik of the New York State Writers Institute, whose time and expertise have ensured participation of major figures in the literary world, including numerous winners of the Pulitzer Prizes for fiction and poetry. This tradition of mutual cooperation and support continues this year in the Writing Grief, Writing Growth virtual event, and into next year with the appearance by two-time Pulitzer Prize winning author Colson Whitehead. Not least, the writing contest and awards ceremony are sustained and enhanced by the writing contributions of our Rensselaer students, now in the contest's 80th year, with more than 600 winners from 1942 to the present. Congratulations to this year's winners.
All right. Thanks, Jim. So it's our Rensselaer contingent, and to hear from the UAlbany side of things. Edward Schwarzschild is the author of 3 books, Insecurity, The Family Diamond, and Responsible Men. A former Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford and Fulbright Scholar in Spain, he has also received fellowships from the New York Foundation for the Arts, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and an Institute for Advanced Study in Germany. He is the Director of Creative Writing and a Fellow of the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany, SUNY.
Thanks so much, Sky. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to add my thanks and congratulations along with Jim. During these brutal, bizarre, and extraordinarily difficult times, it's been a real comfort and inspiration to see this large-scale, long-standing collaboration between UAlbany and RPI continue to adapt and to flourish. I'm grateful to Jim and to Sky, the chief architect of this event, for making it all possible. I'm grateful as well to all of the students, graduate and undergraduate on both campuses, for showing us day in, day out, even and especially at this most trying moment, how to continue to create, how to take the necessary steps to begin to write grief into growth. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Ed. So we are ready for our main event. We're going to hear from each of the 3 readers in turn, and then we will have a featured student so we can highlight some of our excellent students at Rensselaer and at UAlbany Q&A portion, and before we open the Q&A up to the public. So I will read your bios in turn, and again, a reminder, please put your questions in the chat. Keep your applause plentiful and silent for now. Amina Gautier is the author of 3 short story collections: At Risk, Now We Will Be Happy, and The Loss of All Lost Things. At Risk was awarded the Flannery O'Connor Award. Now We Will Be Happy was awarded the Prairie Schooner Book Prize in Fiction. The Loss of All Lost Things was awarded the Elixir Press Award in Fiction. More than 125 of her stories have been published, appearing in Agni, Boston Review, Callaloo, Cincinnati Review, Glimmer Train, Gulf Coast, Joyland, Kenyon Review, Latino Book Review, Mississippi Review, New Flash Fiction Review, Quarterly West, Southern Review, and Tri-Quarterly, among other places. She is the recipient of the Eric Hoffer Legacy Fiction Award, the Phyllis Wheatley Book Award in Fiction, the International Latino Book Award, and the Chicago Public Library Foundation's 21st Century Award. For her body of work, she has received the Penn Malamud Award for Excellence in the Short Story.
Thank you, Sky. I wasn't sure if we were doing all 3 bios before I started. I want to just say thank you to everyone for inviting us. Thank you to all the organizations who have put this together, for still supporting writing, you know, at a time where people seem less interested in the arts, or where there's fewer resources, for still realizing that people need to listen to literature, talk about literature, and come together in a space like this. Also, I'm a native New Yorker, and I hardly ever get to read for New York institutions. So thank you for that as well. Now, the fun, enjoyable stuff has been said. I'm going to read a few sad pages. I'm going to read 6 pages with the time limit. So I'm going to cut the story off before it's finished. The loss of all lost things. The posters go up immediately. They search in all weather. They harass the media for coverage. They leave the light on outside. They do not touch their answering machine. They keep the message exactly the same. They supply the authorities with recent photos, with medical and dental records, with everything they ask. They do all they can think of. They never rest. They never tire. They never lose hope. They take time off, calling in vacation and sick days so that they can stay home and wait, so that they can go out and search, so that they can focus on what's most important. So understanding their friends and neighbors, the whole neighborhood turns out again and again to help them search. There are flyers, cadaver dogs, groups pairing off with flashlights, t-shirts and buttons, posters and ribbons. They turn their house over to the recovery enterprise, transforming their den, basement, and garage into a headquarters to take the calls that stream in and handle the volunteers who show up. Her sister and brother-in-law are a godsend for the 2 weeks they're in town. They drive in from out of state, ready to help. Her sister keeps an eye on their younger son, supplies coffee and donuts to the volunteers. Her brother-in-law mans the phones, listens to the callers, and handles the cranks. It's not as if he's been misplaced. It's nothing like losing one's keys. It's not as simple as retracing one's steps. He has not been lost, but the proper word is too dirty a word that makes it all too real, makes them dread instead of hope. Whose fault is it? He was on no one's watch, less than a block between the school bus drop-off point and home, grabbed somewhere in between. They put up more posters each time they leave the house. How she hates to see them preyed upon by the elements, blowing down the street, crumpled at the curb, blasted by the rain, faded by the sun. Stapled to lampposts and trees, the posters are no match for the passage of time. The sight of one dumped into the public garbage can on their street, her son's face peering through the metal latticework, is enough to send her back indoors, where she will lock herself in and not venture out for days. It's no better inside. She cannot look anywhere without seeing him. His face is in her wallet, preserved behind a plastic sheath. She sees his picture on the refrigerator, peeking out beneath a strawberry-shaped magnet. Scattered through the foyer are all of his toys. She sees them every time she hangs her coat. She refuses to let their younger son play with them. She tells herself they have too many moving pieces, too many small parts a young child could swallow. But truly, she just cannot stand to see a single toy moved from its spot. Only by leaving each one exactly where her older son left it can she maneuver through her day, logging into her computer and searching for news, printing the never-ending flyers, closing her eyes to all of the false leads that cruelly continue to come in. They count his absence in days, the way parents count the age of infants in months, hoping the incremental tallying will somehow make time slow down, make the seconds add up less quickly. They use the holidays as milestones. Halloween and Thanksgiving come and go. Surely, they predict, he'll be home by Christmas. They decorate, slip presents under the tree. When Christmas comes and goes, they hold out for New Year's Day. 30 days, 75, 120 days and still counting. 183 days, Saying it that way makes it seem like so much less than half a year. Whose fault is it? Who would do such a thing? They blame television. They blame drugs and pornography for warping the minds of many. They blame sexual deviance and mental illness, greed, selfishness, loneliness, perversion. There are any number of reasons. The guessing only makes it worse. Too late do they learn to be wary. They peer into the eyes of every person they meet. Anyone between the ages of 8 and 18, anyone between the ages of 18 and 80 is fair game. The two men who haul their garbage, the guy who delivers their pizza. Doesn't even have to be a stranger. Everyone is suspect. The young man who shovels their neighbor's snow, the youth pastor who dresses better than he should, the teacher's aide who once gave their son a ride home. It could be a woman, she interjects. She latches onto the idea, conjures the tale of a desperate woman who looks at their boy and sees the child she lost long ago. Their boy is just the age her miscarried child would have been had it lived. In a crazed moment, she steals him. She calls him by her own son's name, forces him to answer. Soon she doesn't remember that he's not really hers. Don't talk like that, her husband says. I can't help it, she says. Truly, she can't. She can't stop talking like this, can't stop thinking like this. By now, she knows the statistics, knows the likely profile. Her brain is filled with information she never wanted. 80% of abductors have normal IQs or higher. There are over 600,000 registered sex offenders in the United States. Most abductors are not dirty old men, as popularly believed. 70% are younger than 35 years of age. 70% are younger than her. She's the least of all the evils. By now, she knows how slim the chance is, but she prefers to think of this desperate woman who would treat their son like her own. Is she feeding him properly? Is he warm enough at night? He'll be wearing new clothes when we get him back. Some weird tacky getup she's dressed him in, some dowdy thing she thinks matches. Their older boy's clothes wait in the hamper. They won't wash them until he's back. He has missed 3 haircuts and 1 dental appointment. She wonders aloud if the desperate woman will see to it. He rises from the table, his hands covering his ears. He doesn't sing or hum to tune her out, but he might as well. In no time, he is halfway down the hall and into the bedroom that they no longer share. She hears the door slam shut. That's right, leave, she says, run. She searches the kitchen cabinet, looking for a little liquid courage. Where is all the damn liquor? Her younger son enters the kitchen carrying a green ogre action figure in one hand and a gray plastic donkey in the other. Where did you get those? On the floor. You put those right back where you found them. He shakes his head. I want to play with them. They're your brothers. She snatches the toys from his hands and runs out to the foyer where she scans the floor and tries to remember where they were meant to go. Where were they? How were they? Show me. Her younger son bursts into tears. Get in here and show me, she demands. Her younger son points to an area near the front window and another near the doorway. Which one, she asks, holding both toys aloft. He points to the spot by the front entrance and mumbles, the greenie goes there. She lays the green ogre down near the umbrella stand. Like this, she kneels on the carpet and positions him on his back, remembering that she had seen him that way, his hand stretched up toward the ceiling. She looks at him lying like that and knows something is wrong. The ogre's right hand should be positioned slightly lower than its left. She adjusts the toy until she's satisfied. Guided by her son, she crawls to the spot by the window, maneuvering around the other strewn toys, a video game controller, a soft foam football, a tiny headed dinosaur, and places the donkey on its side as she had last remembered seeing it. Only when both toys are in their proper places does she stand up and walk away. Her younger son cries anew, but I want to play with him. Wait until your brother gets back, she says, as if his older brother is just down the street at a friend's house, as if he will be back any minute now, or at least in time for dinner, as if the streetlights coming on at all of the nearby curbs will be the signal for him that it is for all of the other children, urging them inside for the night. Her younger son retreats to the kitchen and kicks the chairs. His tears become streaks as he demands to know where his big brother is and why he can't play with the toys. The urge to soothe him is strong, but she resists. In his eyes, she sees her lost boy looking back. She calls for her husband, asks him to calm the boy, but it is too late. Their younger son hurts himself with crying, strangles himself on saliva, coughs and chokes on his tears. Over his head, they look at one another and make their decision. How are they to focus on recovering their lost boy if they have to worry about this one too? They cannot love him right now. Wisely, they refrain. It's not fair with the older one missing. So they pack him up, tell him he is going to visit with his aunt and uncle. They let him take as many of his own toys as he would like. They promise to see him soon, but they never tell him when. They are not the first to suffer loss. They try to keep it all in perspective, to think of the myriad things that have been lost, such as the Ark of the Covenant, the city of Atlantis, the Dead Sea Scrolls, El Dorado, the Holy Grail, Amelia Earhart, somewhere over the Pacific, Pompeii, buried beneath volcanic ash, the RMS Titanic at the bottom of the sea. Other things are lost slowly over time rather than in one fell swoop, such as loss of feeling, of life and limb, loss of blood, loss of memory, loss of looks, of faith and time, loss of sanity, teeth lost under the pillow, long lost relatives, ignored, forgotten, pretended away. They make these lists to humble themselves, remembering the way their parents attempted to cure eating habits with reminders of children starving in Africa. But the shaming tactic doesn't work. No longer so understanding their supporters. The encouraging letters from people they have never met stop coming in batches. Only a handful now trickle in. The media has moved on, covering newer stories. Their neighbors, who have long since returned to their own lives, pester them to say the words. Their friends, relatives, and loved ones who wanted them to remain hopeful now want them to admit that the worst has come. There is no more pretending. 300 days now. So much time has passed, too much to expect anything good. There are people who can help them, their supporters say, professionals to whom they can turn, therapists, pastors, prayer circles, grief counselors. But they'd prefer to keep their grief to themselves. They don't want to share their misery, hand it off to others, or have it counseled away. It's all they have left of him. They keep it to themselves, feeding and sucking on who they are, the parents of a lost boy. Their status gives them a get out of jail free card to be miserable, to be any way they want. Their misery is nourishing. They fill up on it. Rather than put it away, they prefer to live in limbo in this new waiting world where they have not wronged each other, in this world where no one cares about all of the ways they have erred. In this limbo life, the only thing that matters is their boy. They do not have to be good people. They are not held accountable for what they say and do. As the parents of the lost boy, they are entitled to a break. Deep in the deepest deepness of their hearts, there lies a relief to which they will never own up. This consolation that just right now, they do not have to look at themselves too closely. They've never been perfect parents to begin with, but there's no time now for past hurt, no room for grudges, no space to allow old resentments or unfinished business. To nurse wounds from their private lives at a time like this is pettiness, plain and simple. Their boy is all that matters. Those times when he turned to other women, many other times. The one time she'd turn to one other man deliberately to balance the scale. All those times when they chose to hurt each other with indifference, negligence, and silence are now packed away with the summer clothes they have finally washed, the ones their older son will have outgrown by the time they get him back. Those wounds are tucked into the trunk with the clothes they will save for their remaining son to grow into. Those hurts are wedged in tightly with the mothballs. They will deal with those later, unpack the hurts and air everything out. For now, they will simply stay. I'll stop there.
Thank you for all your inaudible applause as we move through this not so new anymore space. Amina, that was so wonderful. Thank you so much. Our next reader is Susan Nguyen. Susan Nguyen is a teaching writer. She received her BA English from Virginia Tech and her MFA Poetry from Arizona State University, where she was the poetry editor for Hayden's Ferry Review. She's taught creative writing at ASU and the National University of Singapore, and she received a fellowship from the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing to conduct an oral history project centered on the Vietnamese diaspora. She was named one of 3 women poets to watch in 2018 by PBS NewsHour. Her debut poetry collection, Dear Diaspora, won the 2020 Prairie Schooner Book Prize in Poetry and will be published by the University of Nebraska Press in September 2021.
Thank you, Sky. Wow, thank you everyone for being in this room and creating the space and sharing it with all of us, and for everyone to help put this event together. It's been a while since I've done a reading, so a little nervous, but I'm excited to read to you guys from my forthcoming collection, Dear Diaspora. The collection really is just my exploration of the Vietnamese diaspora, my experiences with it, intersections between diaspora, memory, grief, and girlhood in the US. So very much for a lot of it's from my lived experience for sure. And I guess maybe one thing to know from the poems I'm going to read is the main character in my collection is Susie. So the first poem I'm going to read is one of the earlier ones in the collection. The title is The First Language, and it in part is inspired by the Vietnamese language courses I took when I was doing my MFA at ASU. I took those language courses for 3 years, and somewhere in my notes, I don't know how accurate this is, but this is like my memory and found it in my notes. We were learning about the ancient like writing system in Vietnam before what is used today, and I had written down somewhere that that language system kind of looked like tadpoles, or maybe the name of it was kind of based off tadpoles. I don't even remember anymore, but I wrote it down in my notes and it kind of led to this poem. The First Language. 1. Behind the church, we ran through labyrinths of poplar and hickory, dirt paths cutting through ravines in the backs of suburban homes, their brick patios and striped furniture. In the green light of summer, we loved getting lost, how we could step into woods and exit in a cul-de-sac 8 blocks away. Loved it best when tadpoles formed a halo around our toes. 2. Before he disappeared, my father taught me how to catch tadpoles in my hand. The trick wasn't just to stay still, but to stop breathing. He caught dozens like this, knees bent and pant legs folded, his face inches above the creek. He taught me that our first language was named after tadpoles, the way they moved through water, a knife dissecting the stratosphere, a voice cutting quiet. 3. My third favorite memory of him is walking hand in hand on 2-lane roads, identifying Virginia trees. In one pocket, a zodiac sign lighter, a button for mother's favorite blouse. In the other, acorns for burying. I can still identify the red oaks. 4. Today, the tadpoles flow through my fingers like an egg yolk, and my impulse is to cradle one in my mouth. The tadpole swims circles and my tongue follows, mapping its movement before spitting. Susie with an I. is not afraid of the dark or the things that move in its current. She approaches school like she approaches most things, eyes narrowed, scanning the edges of sight. When she scribbles her name, she dots the I, rubs the sharp graphite onto her finger. Before bed, she says, our Father, our Father, our Father, our Father, as fast as she can. The fastest was in Sunday school. Highlighting the Virgin Mary pink, she drowned out the counselor's drone with prayer. Tonight, she turns her blinds inward. Through a tiny sliver, the moon spoils the dark. Throughout my collection, I have a few poems scattered throughout called Letter to the Diaspora, and that's kind of where I got the title for my collection. That was kind of a placeholder, and then I kept saying it so much that now it is the title of my collection because I couldn't think of anything else. It actually started out as one long poem with a lot of sections, and thanks to advice of my mentor, I decided to break that up and keep the strongest parts, and they kind of pop up throughout. Letter to the Diaspora. Dear Diaspora, last night I had the American dream. In the dream, I had an indoor pool. In the dream, I walked my dead dog with a diamond leash. I ate a greasy burger with my perfect hands. I had the most beautiful sex. My skin was smooth, alabaster as the moon. In the morning, everything had changed. There was no pool, only twine for drying clothes. And the dead remained dead. My perfect hands held nothing. Nothing was better. Cicada Summer. I grew up on the East Coast in Virginia, so the cicadas that come out every 17 years. I have very vivid memories of that happening once when I was in elementary school, and that was one of the inspirations for this poem. The cicadas come from the ground and enter the world in currents, streaming down tree trunks, over branches, across sidewalks and roads, the males pulsing their abdomens, singing for sex. In the field behind the school, Susie and her classmates stand still as dozens climb over their bodies, careful not to crush the winged insects beneath their feet, fearful of littering the ground with broken glass. Susie collects every wing she can find. Each one becomes a small body of water she carries in her pocket, a broken window pane she holds to each eye. She counts dozens more on her way home and imagines how they would taste. Hands in her pockets, touching the wings to each fingertip, she wonders, would they still sing on the way to death, and would it sound any different? Today, she walks through uneven fields of green and spits into tall grass, the roots of trees, listens as the clicking of cicadas fills her body with song. The green lacerates her ankles, and she imagines her blood mixed with dirt will nourish, will add to the muscle tremor of the earth. This next poem is after Athena Farrokhzad's collection, White Light. If I say my body is grieving, is it American or Vietnamese? My mother said, our country no longer exists. My father said, in our language, the same word means green and blue, sun. My father said, to distinguish between the two, you say sun la, green leaf, and Sanzajai, blue sky. My mother's miscarriage after me said, what color was I? My mother said, in our language, the same word means land and water, Nuuk. My grandmother said, all language is a metaphor. Say what you mean. My father said, if I say I cannot live without Nuuk, do I mean country? My mother said, Vietnam's body curves like the letter S, serpentine, fragile. My father said, the Mekong Delta translates to River of Nine Dragons because 9 tributaries sprawl towards the sea. My mother's miscarriage after me said, was my salted mouth American or Vietnamese? My mother said, don't translate me. My grandmother said, don't speak lest your tongue rush like a river. In the night, history absconds with us. We learn to open in darkness. My mother said, when you tell it, do I float on land and water? My father said, am I the green leaf, the blue sky? My American mouth cannot separate itself from my body. Wish list. Susie plucks the occasional white hair from her mother's head and all the stiff hairs from her powdered armpit. Every dozen is worth a dime. This is her only allowance. She used to pluck her father's white hairs too, but when they spread to sideburns and eyebrows, her mother bought black hair dye from CVS. When Susie first asks for an allowance, her mother doesn't know the meaning of the word. Who pays for your food, gives you a roof to sleep under? The next day, she tells all her nail lady friends, whoop for days, and who raised her like that? Susie adds allowance to her wish list for a bourgeois life alongside a waterbed, family vacations to Disney World, a minivan with built-in video player, Lisa Frank school supplies, fondue sets, the wooden tree swing. Letter to the Diaspora. Dear Diaspora, does memory eat the body? What is the body whittled down? The eyes as locket, mouth, hinge. Language cannot express all memory, the ones that are not wholly present, that exist at the edges, so that you only recall in small moments of brilliance. When someone shows you a picture, a place where you were present and your body took up space, acted and moved and was acted upon, and you realize you would never remember your body there if it wasn't for this other, to unlock the small part living in you, but separate from you. How can this be? A fish leaping out of the depths, the well, a moment of light, orange flame, brief glimmer, a slice. What if memory is a light you swallow? I have a few poems throughout my collection titled You Google Vietnam. And all of these poems is just a result of just my research and going into archives and older newspaper articles. So this one is about, or is inspired by an article and borrows some language from an article that came out in the late 1990s. And it was about protests that occurred because I think it was a Vietnamese merchant had hung the Vietnam's communist flag and a picture of Ho Chi Minh, the communist leader, on the wall of his video store. And from what I can remember from the article, like over 15,000 people came and protested for at least that weekend, if not more, I don't remember. A lot of them were middle-aged overseas Vietnamese communities. There were some American veterans as well. But in hanging up that picture, the flag, it stoked a lot of anger, renewed a lot of anger, I think. So that's where this poem is inspired by, and some of the language is borrowed from some of the research I did as well. You Google Vietnam. Find it in an OC strip mall. Little Saigon, where a man is slapped with a handful of spit outside his high-tech video store. Little Saigon, where the man is hit from behind and someone drapes the old flag over his fallen body, yellow, 3 red stripes. When people see the picture he hung, they see blood. They hang effigies. The man says, I'm not a communist. Communists killed my brother. But no one hears him. In his hands, he holds a sign that reads, nothing is more precious than liberty. Thousands stand outside his store for weeks. We cannot do this in our country without getting shot. Charlie's Angels. Susie thinks if only she had Lucy Liu's freckles, she could be beautiful. She loved her performance in Charlie's Angels, the reboot. She now rounds corners with clasped hands, a pointer finger gun. Every Sunday Mass, she prays for high cheekbones and thin face. Last Christmas, her cousins started calling her Big Head. It was because her mother had never given birth to her, she knew. She, a C-section baby, sliced out. Yes, if only her face held sharper corners, a pointed diamond, she might finally be someone. A freckled girl of someone's dreams. All right, and I'm just gonna, read 2 more poems at the time I have left just to wrap it up. Susie as a series of questions. Did father ever return? Why did he leave? How did mother pay her hospital bills? Who escorted me home? When did I first notice my body? How am I always silent? What was in the green light? Mother showed me. Because I left the stove on, because I stole flowers from the altar, because I did not receive communion. He was large and took from my body. The ground pressed rocks into my back, blades of green around my neck. In this memory, I am small. The body is loud. Sometimes mother speaks to me in a life I don't remember, and I can see it makes her sad when I can't answer. I try to speak anyway, but English is what makes her sad. I fall back into the shape of my mouth. I can never remember falling asleep, but I can always remember my dreams. Last night, I could walk on water, and the salted sea carried me to my father's shadow. It carried me to an inlet where butterflies drifted through milkweed. I stayed away from their terrible bodies. I don't know. All right, final poem. Most noble, heroic, and virgin lady. Her mother tells her the legends of women, the Jung sisters with their army of mothers and daughters, the first to rebel against the Han, call themselves queen before drowning, disappearing into the sky. Lady Ju riding into battle on an elephant's head, her breasts a meter long, tied behind her back. These are not fairy tales, her mother says. We are people of war. Woman will always sustain us. I have been to their temples. Woman means immortal. Thank you.
I love seeing everyone's smiling faces and applause. Thank you so much, Susan. That was lovely. We have our final reader tonight, Molly McCully Brown, the author of the essay collection, Places I Take in My Body, and the poetry collection, The Virginia State Colony for Epileptics and Feeble-Minded, which won the 2016 Lexi Rudnitsky First Book Prize and was named a New York Times Critic Top Book of 2017. With Susanna Nevison, she is also the co-author of the poetry collection In the Field Between Us. Brown has been the recipient of the Amy Lowell Poetry Traveling Scholarship, a United States Artist Fellowship, a Civitella Raineri Foundation Fellowship, and the Jeff Baskin Writers Fellowship from the Oxford American Magazine. Her poems and essays have appeared in the Paris Review, Tin House, The Guardian, Virginia Quarterly Review, Vogue, The New York Times, Crazy Horse, the Yale Review, and elsewhere. Raised in rural Virginia, she's a graduate of Bard College at Simon's Rock, Stanford University, and the University of Mississippi, where she received her MFA. She teaches at Old Dominion University, where she is an assistant professor of English and creative nonfiction and a member of the MFA core faculty.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I just want to echo all the thanks to everyone who organized this event and made it possible, and to say that I think it's especially important and it's a special pleasure right now to be in conversation and in communion with other writers. Amina and Susan, it was so great to hear you read. And Susan, I'm really looking forward to your book. I can't wait. I'm going to read just a very brief essay today from my essay collection, Places I've Taken My Body, which is, among other things, about the way that luck and grace and good fortune can exist inside and alongside suffering and struggle, and the ways that they can inform and complicate one another. And it's called The Skin You're In. In Italian, the verb to skin is spellare. The way I understand it, this is a verb distinct from the Italian for peel or strip or shuck. It's the word you'd use for preparing an animal, for flaying a corpse. Informally, you can also use a version of it when you mean I skinned my knee, or even I shed my skin. Either way, it's a word that connotes a body revealed and ready for refashioning. I learned all this one afternoon in Bologna at the threshold of the anatomical theater of the Archiginnasio, a friend translating the librarian's rapid Italian as quickly as she can manage. We're at the site of the University of Bologna's medical school, and this room, built in 1637, is where they taught the earliest human anatomy courses and did some of the first sanctioned dissections of human bodies in the West. Surgery, as we understand it, was essentially born here, and now the librarian is gesturing up at the wall above the marble operating table where two lacquered wooden statues gaze down. I look closer and realize they're all carved, visible muscle and bone. He calls them spallati, the skinless ones. This trip is a colossal, improbable gift. My first collection of poems has just been released, and as part of its publication, I'm here in Italy to spend 6 weeks at an artist residency at a castle in Umbria. I'm 25 and about 3 weeks out of graduate school. The notion that I have any kind of a writing career still feels a little like a joke. And when you combine it with words like castle and Europe and funded fellowship, I have the distinct sensation I am watching a movie of someone else's life. I can't stop fingering the passport in my purse. I need a constant, tangible reminder that this is really happening. I can't believe my own luck. But over the last year or so, as my book has come into being and my professional life has come to resemble more and more the one I've been dreaming of since I was a child, my body has been undergoing its own kind of transformation. The symptoms of my cerebral palsy are worsening. Recently, the low, consistent ache in my knees has been increasing in intensity, and my back has begun to spasm whenever I stand up, hard enough to knock me over if I'm not careful. The two kind of changes form a mystifying, syncopated rhythm. I have a piece of artistic good luck, and as if in concert, I get a little less mobile and then a little more pain. I use my wheelchair more and more, even for very short distances. In the 2 weeks before I leave for Italy, I push myself too hard while preparing to travel. I take a nasty fall and wrench something I can feel but not name. All of a sudden, it hurts when I'm sitting at my desk, when I roll over in bed, when I bend to tie my shoes. I'm panicked and enraged at the timing. I drag myself to the doctor and ask for a cortisone shot and a prescription for a heavy-duty muscle relaxer I can take on the 10-hour plane ride to Italy. The doctor at the campus health center wants to request my medical records, wants to do an x-ray and figure out what's really going on. I don't have time, I tell him. I have things to do. He shakes his head, but gives me the shot and the prescription. I want to tell him, listen, I'm breaking every rule I've ever had for how I treat my body. I'm suspicious of quick fixes, steroids, narcotics, anything that masks the real weather of the body with false calm. I want to say, I swear I've been tender, I've been tough when I needed to be. I've let my body call the shots so it would last. Just this once, I need to force it to fall in line. I want to make him understand. I love my body, but I can't let it take this from me. Instead, I say thank you and leave his office gingerly. Here in Bologna, I'm visiting an old friend for a few days before my residency starts, and we've come into the anatomical theater through a circuitous back entrance in a connected building, one that involves an elevator so narrow I can barely fit my wheelchair inside it, as well as several locked doors which the librarian leads us through apologetically. My friend translates his steady stream of apologies and explanations. This is a very old historic building. They had to get so many special permits even to put an elevator in the one next door. The city is terrible for people in wheelchairs. If he had known, I didn't walk. I've discovered by now that I can get almost nowhere in the city through the front door, and there are many places I can't access at all. I've also fallen in love with the light and the occasional hidden channels of water tucked behind wrought iron gates, all the rose-colored stone and the throng of the main piazza. The past feels shoulder to shoulder with the present here. I want to witness everything, and I'm having trouble knowing what to do with the way the magic of the place is tangled up in my inability to access it, or with how my sense of my unbelievable luck is butting heads with my mounting anxiety about my mobility, my mounting frustration about my pain. The dissonance makes me fragile and defensive. My life is extraordinary. How dare I feel sadder than I do grateful? There's so much in the world I want to see and do, and already so much of it is unreachable to me. The last time I had a sudden, inexplicable increase in pain, it marked the first time I needed a wheelchair, the last time I walked more than a city block. I never got that early body back. This is the beginning of the life I've always wanted. What if I'm about to lose another body? Next to the Spallati are carved statues of famous physicians, Hippocrates, Linnaeus, flanked by renderings of Apollo, several Catholic saints, and constellations named for figures from mythology. Humanity, science, and all of these conceptions of divinity conjured up together for some sort of communion in the service of understanding how it is we're made and what to do with that. My own body feels skinless, rubbed raw. I imagine it butterflied on the marble table, brain and heart, liver and lungs, muscles and tendons all laid bare, all my brain's bad wiring in evidence, thickets of scar tissue every place a surgeon has reshaped me over the years. Does it matter if I tell you that the anatomical theater itself is essentially a reconstruction? The original chamber was mostly destroyed in an air raid during the Second World War. After the bombs, they pulled the old statues from the rubble and rebuilt the place from the ground up. They tried to use as much of the original material as possible to make it match as closely as they could a sturdier version of the very place that it had been before. You can't see the seams where they affixed the Spallati and the saints to the new walls. Does it matter that dissection was once considered too invasive and violent a study to subject most bodies to? That originally they used the corpses of criminals and prostitutes and instructive cadavers and buried them in unmarked graves without bothering to stitch them back together again? That while doctors gave instructions to medical students, they left the actual cutting to butchers. I owe the current shape of my body, almost every inch of mobility I've ever had, to scores of people taken apart without their consent. People no one cared enough to name or suture into any kind of remade whole once they had taken what they could. The book that won me this fellowship to Italy is about a real government-run residential hospital for people with serious mental and physical disabilities that was the epicenter of the American eugenics movement in the first half of the 20th century. More than 8,000 people were sterilized there without their knowledge. One colossal misunderstanding about the brain and body piled on top of another. Doctors with just enough knowledge about how we're made to do cataclysmic, permanent violence spurred by terror. Cut a body just like that to ensure that it will never make another one. Stitch like that to sew it back together. Does it matter that the midday light in the operating theater washes the whole place the color of dark, sweet cherries? That on top of their skinless bodies, the men have the fine-boned faces of angels? How about this? In a handful of months, my health insurance will lapse. And at home in the United States, the government is doing its level best to make me uninsurable. I have needed fixing from the moment I was born. I can feel myself falling apart. Does it matter that I am afraid? In Bologna, I take a muscle relaxer every night, a heavy-duty anti-inflammatory every morning. I do everything I can to keep my body quiet, tell it, hush, please behave, we're so lucky to be here. One day, I climbed 5 tall flights of stairs, leaning heavily on a railing because I have to reach the top of a nearby city. Everyone says it's an unmissable view, so I have to see it now in case I never can again, in case it's my last chance to ever climb this high. It's extraordinary, all these terracotta roofs spilling beautifully down the green mountain, the walls of fortresses and spires of churches punctuating an otherwise empty sky. I can't do it justice. You'd have to see it for yourself. That night, I don't really sleep. My hips and knees ache so intensely I can almost hear it. I lie still on the mattress because any real motion produces a spasm. Maybe you can only ask your body to lie to itself for so long. And so once I get to Umbria and my residency begins in earnest, I taper off the medication, don't get up out of the wheelchair except to walk a couple of steps to go to the dinner table or climb gingerly into a golf cart or a car. Okay, I tell my body, you can get loud again. I'll listen, I'll be gentle. There's so much I can't see of the castle's beautiful grounds, so many places I can't go at all, not even once in my life. But out the window of my bedroom here, some foreign flower is blooming a gorgeous yellow in the courtyard below. And in the morning, there are piles and piles of apricots, bright and sweet in a white china bowl. There's a tiny retrofitted elevator in the center of the castle, and the door of the turret is just wide enough that I can ease my wheelchair through it to see the sunset, a huge red fist above the horizon. As long as I'm gentle, the pain mostly eases to a constant tenderness. I can't believe my own luck. I don't know exactly what's happening in my body, and I fear soon someone will need to take it apart again and stitch it back together. So I'm trying to listen as I shift inside myself and watch the world from every angle I can see without standing, preparing quietly to transform again. You can use the verb spolare when you mean I shed my skin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly. So I hope you all have lots of questions for the panelists. I want to remind you that those can go in the chat. They will come to the hosts, and then we will moderate those when we open up the discussion to Q&A. So that'll go through the chat. You can put them in the chat anytime. We're going to begin the Q&A portion of our program with featured students. So we wanted to make this event a student-centered event. So we have a few students who have prepared some questions to get us started, and please do put your questions in the chat. So our first question comes from Hannah Lim, an undergraduate senior majoring in computer science at Rensselaer. She likes making cool stuff like robots, video essays, and bad poetry. Hannah?
Hello, can you guys hear me? Okay, thanks for the readings. That was really special and I really enjoyed them. My question is one that I think of all the time in Professor Annika's creative writing class when I'm submitting my personal work, but these works all are personally revealing and sometimes really emotionally vulnerable. So what is your process for accessing that vulnerability in your creative work, and how do you handle having it out in the world? How do you keep yourself from feeling like very exposed with things like that being published or launched into your audience? Any insight?
Are we going in order, Sky?
So my thought is, it's a good question. My thought is we can be a little Zoom awkward. We're all in this together, and you all can perhaps keep yourselves unmuted or just kind of work it out amongst yourselves. Whoever wants to take the first question, and if you don't have a response to a certain question, that's fine too.
Okay, I'll raise my hand. So I'll start with that one. And I guess one of the ways that I handle that or access the vulnerability is to remember or to remind myself of why I'm writing in the first place. And I brought one of my favorite quotes about like writing fiction. I know that people have very different feelings about John Gardner, but since I'm at RPI and SUNY Albany, I figured it's okay to mention Gardner. So in the art of fiction, in the exercises section where you wouldn't expect this advice to be, he says, to write with taste in the highest sense is to write with the assumption that 1 out of 100 people who read one's work may be dying or have some loved one dying. To write so that no one commits suicide, no one despairs. To write as Shakespeare wrote so that people understand, sympathize, see the universality of pain, and feel strengthened, if not directly encouraged, to live on, right? So if I'm thinking about that one person out of 100, then, that's all I need to remember, that it's necessary to be emotionally vulnerable or to quote unquote expose oneself, because there's 1 out of 100 readers or people in the audience who need that. So that's my main reminder to help me, not trivialize emotions, not cut corners, not indulge in sort of emotional cliches or opt for sentimentality instead of real emotional vulnerability.
Susan, you go.
Oh gosh, okay. I saw you on mute first. Hannah, thank you for your question. I think I don't have a real process. I know this is a theory. One of the things I do though, I always kind of keep a running list, whether it's on my phone, a notepad, Google Doc, wherever I am, just of memories that pop up randomly that I might not always be easily able to access, whether it's because I saw something, heard a song, whatever it is. And sometimes when I go to write and I don't know where to start or what I'm doing next, it does help to go to that list of memories, just to kind of get into the writing mode. Even if what I end up writing has nothing to do with the memories, or maybe I start there and take it out and it becomes something totally different. So maybe this is my theory, maybe having that list and being able to access that when needed, kind of helps me access some of those emotions a little bit easier or quicker otherwise. And I think in terms of like having it out there in the world, I find it helps me to process my experiences and emotions through writing. And I find it easier to read that writing to a room of strangers than potentially to say to someone in my real life, like, hey, this is how I felt when you did that. It's like, I wrote a poem and read it to the world. So for me, I also think of poetry too. Like I've had people say, wow, this is really personal. And in some ways it is, but there also are imagined elements and fictional elements too in my poetry. And sometimes I think people forget that or lose sight, So to me, I always feel like, okay, no matter what level of personal this is, there is still in some ways, I don't know if barrier is the right word, but it's the speaker, right? And sometimes that is very much me. Sometimes it's not very much me at all. To get to the root of the emotion or what it is I'm trying to say. I think if I include other people in my life in the poems, I will change names, because I don't know how other people might feel about the vulnerability aspect. But I find it easier to be vulnerable in writing than honestly in maybe potentially a conversation with someone, even if it is someone who I'm close to.
Yeah, so I think Amina and Susan have both given really lovely answers about how you sort of remind yourself why it's worth taking the risk and making yourself vulnerable, and then sort of practically how you approach that angle. But I think, and those both speak to me. But I think the other thing to remember is that as much as writing is an act of vulnerability and revelation, there's also an immense amount of power and control that's present in being a writer, right? Our bodies, to varying degrees and in varying ways, they tell stories just by virtue of their existence in the world, right? And people make assumptions about them that may or may not be correct, and people have their own reactions to them and relationships to them. And one of the things that we get to do as writers is we get to shape the narrative, right? And we get to ask the questions that feel most important to us and make the revelations that we want people to know, and talk back to the assumptions and talk back to the suffering and the resistance and the difficulty. And so one of the ways that I think about sort of revealing emotionally vulnerable material, whether I'm doing it biographically in nonfiction or whether I'm exploring it in poetry and via the lyric, is to think about it actually as not just a sort of putting myself out there, but as an act of shaping, right, and determining the conversation and the terms of the story, and the way that I'm being heard and understood, which is not always a thing that I get to do just as a person living in the world, right? And so if I remind myself that along with this vulnerability, this openness, this rawness, this risk, there's also a measure of power. Those things living alongside each other, I think, are what's important to me about literature, and that make my own practice possible.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
All right. So our next question comes from Audrey Peterson McCann, a PhD candidate in the English department at SUNY Albany. Her dissertation will examine the treatment of animals and children by Victorian authors. She is currently teaching a course on the short story at UAlbany.
So my question is for Amina. Amina, in the title story from your latest collection, The Loss of All Lost Things, you present the raw pain that comes with loss, but you also seem to delve into potential growth that can come after. How do you tap into the plethora of emotions so seamlessly in your fiction? And to open this up to the rest of you, how do you think about including various emotional registers in your various works?
Thanks for that question, Audrey. So, in addition to what I said about Gardner, which like that quote is always on my mind, I think one of the things I enjoy most about being a writer of literary fiction is that the form itself sort of requires ups and downs, right, in a way that perhaps some other some genres of fiction which rely on formula might not, right? Like people chart it on whiteboards in a classroom, like the little tiny little mountains, the upside down, the inverted check mark, etc. Right? That short stories, novels, that they're full of hills and valleys, and those don't have to be plot points, right? That those can be emotional ups and downs, that they can be variations in the register. And for me, that's part of what makes it literary. And then specifically in the with realism, which which is where I am most at home, although I do write some speculative, it's realistic that in a general day, when I just look at my own life, I couldn't even keep count of like how many emotional ups and downs I have, like the range of emotions I feel in one day, 10, 20, 30, 40, and hey, that's just before breakfast. No, I'm joking about that part. But you don't want to put all of them into the fiction. You want to compress, but I still want to sort of create that, have that verisimilitude, like create that authentic and genuine experience, which comes from our lives. And the reason for growth, I mean, most of my stories don't have happy endings. Like I think only 2 out of 125 do, and I wouldn't call them like happy, but like Audrey said, there's growth. There's sometimes a trend upwards, because one of the things that I'm just constantly reminded of is that, even when I'm, at my most distraught, when I'm most despairing or most the sun is still like something in my personal life that can, cheer me up, or, that I can use for resilience. Like there's still this undisputable fact, that might sound a little corny or hokey, but those are the things that that I am, thinking about when I want to make a story sort of realistic, genuine in terms of its emotions, its growth, and its range. The stories aren't about me, but putting myself in there and thinking about what would I do, how would I how would I feel, right? And I'm talking about form and genre, and this is like no diss to film because I love movies, but reminding myself that fiction is not film, right? I see so many movies and films, like a character sort of dies or has some sort of traumatic experience, like just to advance the plot. And I'm watching it and I'm like, so wait, they just got over that, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and they moved on, and no one grieved and no one processed it. And remembering that that's not the form that I'm writing in, and I have time, on the paper to actually like delve into the the backstory of that emotion, or delve into like the cause and effects, and actually allow my characters to feel what they're feeling for a couple of pages. And I think that that's a real strength and joy in writing literary fiction.
I can go next. I don't think I think about emotional registers when I'm writing too much, but I do think about energy in a poem for sure. And kind of like the ups and downs that Amina mentioned, I can't keep it the same energy throughout the whole poem, right? Whether it is, I don't know, maybe on the sadder side, or even if it is a hot peak, very intense emotion, I don't want to keep that going the whole way through, because I think as a writer and as a reader, that would be very hard to follow or want to continue reading. So I do think about energy. And I think really when I think about emotional registers or in my work, I think it's when I'm trying to be humorous in my work, because usually that's not the stuff that I write or that comes out in terms of voice or tone. I would like to think in real life I am a silly or funny person. I don't know what my friends would say about that, but that's what I think. And I'm like, wow, I would love to bring this into my writing, and that's something I'm still trying to figure out, because that's when I'm so conscious of the emotional register. And always asking myself, are you trying too hard right now? Probably yes. So I'm still trying to figure that out. End it there.
Yeah, all I have to add to that is that I also am a person who thinks of myself as a pretty funny and humorous person, and somehow everything that I write is like profoundly dark and devastating, and it's sad. So I'm right there with you. I also wish I was a funny writer, and it hasn't yet come to fruition.
So if you too find yourself a darkened, dreary, lovely writer, you're in good company, it sounds like. We can all take heart. So one little mini announcement is there's actually a party favor for this event. I should have mentioned it earlier. I'm going to put it into the chat after our featured student portion of the event and before the open Q&A. So hang out and you will get a PDF party favor for attending this event. So we have another student question. Kyle Macy is a fiction writer from Indianapolis, Indiana. He received a BA in English writing from DePaul University and an MFA in fiction writing from the University of Alabama. A first-year PhD candidate at UAlbany, he is presently at work on a novel.
Hi, everyone. Great readings all around. Thank you all. And thank you all for organizing this event. It's a great opportunity for some of that writerly community that we have all been searching for. My question is for Molly in particular, but I think it kind of opens up for the group. Molly, your poems feature these kind of stark and vivid images that kind of uproot our typical relationship to ourselves or our bodies. And in your reading today, I mean, even in the very titles, right? The collection, Places I've Taken My Body, and the skin you're in, right? There's a sort of interrogation of the relationship between your sort of interior landscape, your psychology or yourself, and then the exterior world out there and this sort of physical body stuck between the two. How do you think about those boundaries or about transgressing them in your work? And to sort of open that up to everyone, usually times like these, previous catastrophes of our lifetime, we have that opportunity to come together as a community, but we see ourselves sort of mitigated between each other and our exterior world. So how is that sort of unique remoteness informed your work or perhaps your work habits? Thank you.
Yeah, Kyle, it's such a smart question, and I think you've gotten in some ways at the crux of what motivates my work, which is that I'm incredibly interested in the various facets of who we are and the ways in which they're yoked to one another, and separate from one another, and also then the ways in which we are both yoked to the physical world and also always sort of in complicated communion with it. And I think that you know, the thing that has been most important for me, both in life but also artistically, is to understand that those relationships and those borders and boundaries are not static and certain and settled, right? They're fluid and changing, and are going to be so forever and for always, right? And I think that's one of the reasons that I like to work in a variety of genres and in a variety of forms, because different kinds of texts demand different kinds of bodies, and they demand different relationships to the bodies and different relationships to reality. And you know, the title of the essay collection, Places I've Taken My Body, is I think a great example of that, because it's this title that asserts my body as somehow separate from the rest of myself, right? While also acknowledging that the body has to go everywhere with the self. And the book becomes very much about interrogating this sense of the degree to which we are separate from and constituted by and attached to our bodies. And we also I had a long conversation with my editor about whether we could call the book Places I've Taken My Body, or whether it was going to sound too much like I was carrying around a corpse to different locations. But I think in some ways that joke, as funny as it is also sort of gets at the heart of what feels interesting to me about it, right? Which is that we can't exist without our physical forms, and yet they're so constitutive of who we are, and sometimes they're anchors and sometimes they're vehicles, right? And that's a complicated duality.
To answer the part of the question, just in terms of pandemic, how that has affected writing or just writing habits, it's been really hard. It's been really hard the past year. To be honest, I didn't write very much of 2020, and I'm totally okay with that. Just trying to get through the day to day. And I work for a university. I work with student engagement and student retention, and students are having a very hard time now, and I work directly with them. So it's been a lot of, that's where a lot of energy has been going, and a lot of emotional management as well. So I think 2020, I was just trying to get through it. And honestly, instead of writing, for me, I was like, okay, like at least get into reading more than I think I already was. So that way I can still be kind of in it. And there have been a lot of great remote Zoom events. I've been to a handful, probably not as many as I signed up to do, because in theory, I want to go to all of them. And then after work, I'm like, I've been on Zoom or online all day. It doesn't always happen. So it's been really hard, but for whatever reason, 2021, there has been renewed, I think, for me, like renewed, I guess, time and energy that I've been putting into writing again. I don't totally know why. I don't know how. I think it might just be like, okay, we've gotten through 2020. It was a struggle. It's still a struggle, honestly, but all of a sudden now I have gotten back into it. And I graduated from my MFA in 2018. And since then I hadn't really written there. I've heard that before from other grad students, you know, post MFA, like sometimes it's months or a year or two, and when things slow down. So I think for me, it's just been about accepting that. And pandemic definitely didn't help, but I'm happy to kind of get back into the swing of things.
So I ended up being incredibly fortunate. I don't really mention on Facebook that I'm on sabbatical because I don't want people to come and like stone me, but I had already been scheduled to be on sabbatical, you know, before the pandemic. You know, I don't know, I guess I used my like Charles Xavier, like, you know, powers of telekinesis to know that I needed that time off. So I was already in a position where I was sort of planning to go inward and to, you know, isolate. You know, of course I was planning to do it like all over the world at a bunch of like great residencies, and I'm just doing it in my boring apartment. But those two things coinciding, the isolation had not really affected my writing process this particular year, and in that I was fortunate. But also, I guess, I used it as an opportunity. Like I've talked a lot about the MacGyver method of fiction writing, which doesn't actually exist. It's not like a real thing. It's just like something that I call the way that I write fiction. And I mean like the real MacGyver, like from the 80s, like not whatever MacGyver reboot has been rebooted. I haven't seen it. I don't know. But when I say like MacGyver fiction, I mean, like he's stuck in an elevator and he's got like a cotton ball and like a paper clip or something, and he like creates some kind of hydraulic system and gets the elevator running. Like he works with what he has. And that's always been my mode of fiction writing. Like when I was in grad school and I only had a 3-hour seminar a day and I had like lots of time, I would write for 8 to 10 hours a day. When I had a tenure track position, I had to squeeze my writing like Thursday to Sunday to sort of to go out in the world, to look at crowds, to listen to dialogue, to, take notes on setting, which is something that you can't really do when you're trying to stay safe during isolation. So then that means, okay, MacGyvering it means that I can't go out in the world and gather that information. And it means that maybe right now for this length of time, I have to revisit notes that I've taken and, revise drafts of things that I already have and just sort of find strengths with what I have at my disposal to work with and see what I can come up with. And that's pretty much what I've been doing. Like I had some research that I wasn't able to complete for a longer project. So I wrote a lot of shorts in the past year. I wrote published maybe I wrote maybe like 17 stories. 13 of them were picked up for publication, but like 6 of them were shorts, just little tiny, 250 word, 500 word, 1,000 word pieces, because for the first couple of months of the pandemic, that was the length of my concentration. And as things began to get better for people and there were, talks of vaccines, my brain gave me a little more space and allowed me to write longer stories. So I've just been MacGyvering for the past year.
All right, you heard it here, folks. MacGyver method of fiction writing. We have 2 more featured student questions, and then we are getting some questions in the chat, and we will address those in the time we have left before announcing the McKinney winners. So hang in there. There's party favors, new methods of fiction writing, and the big reveal. So our next student is Veronica. Originally from Colombia, Veronica Jordan-Sardi is a first-year PhD student at SUNY Albany's English department, specializing in creative writing. She received an MA in comparative literature from the University of Iowa and an MFA from California College of the Arts. Her writing can be found in the Columbia Journal, Litro Magazine, Cleaver Magazine, Comparative Literature Commons, and La Pareza Ediciones.
Thanks, Guy. Nice pronunciation. I'm really happy to be here. This has been so inspiring and moving and refreshing. So thank you, all 3 of you, for sharing some of this writing, some of this much needed writing love. I have a question for Susan, but I'm definitely going to open up to all of you. So Susan, I just finished reading your book, Dear Diaspora, and I have a question about the quote that you chose. So you have a quote that you put in the beginning of the book by, I might not pronounce this right, but Teresa Hack Kun Cha. Sorry if I butchered that. But the quote speaks of the tragedy and trauma that we inherit from our ancestors, and our reasons as artists behind going back to these moments, right? Like revisiting these moments in our writing. So the quote really frames your book as a reply that will not repeat history in oblivion. So my question is, how and why is this book a reply to the pain that you have inherited? And a related question for all panelists is, how do you think loss or pain can be relived or relived through the act of remembering and imaginating and writing?
Thank you, Veronica, for your question. It's a great question, and it's a challenging one to answer as well. I do want to read the beginning of the quote that I included in the beginning of my book. The beginning goes, "Why resurrect it all now? From the past history, the old wound, the past emotions all over again." I think, I spent a lot of my life, I think, growing up, just trying to assimilate and like wanting to be white, to be quite honest. So there was there was a long time where I didn't know very much of just my Vietnamese identity, heritage, culture, language, etc. So I think in some ways, my collection might be a reply, or maybe it kind of feels like the step before the reply, or maybe the reply is ongoing and never ending in my writing and my work and research. I think I sometimes feel like maybe it's the part before the reply, in the sense that like I'm at the stage of, okay, learning and acknowledging this past and this history. I think it's important to say that now, and it's also kind of painful, but to say that I spent so long not like being in tune or seeking out that part of myself. But I think it's important to say right now, just because of the violence that the Asian American Pacific Islander community is experiencing, and I've been seeing a lot of people share the same experiences. So I'm like, oh yeah, it's not just me. I'm not alone, and others are not alone. But I think just trying to interrogate that more in my writing, and I think the reply is probably always going to be ongoing. And I think at this point, for me, where I am right now, having written this collection, what I've been thinking about lately is like what joy might look like, what joy might emerge from a fragmented history and past. Not to say that there isn't joy in this collection. I think there is, in a few poems and small blips, but it's not always obvious. Sometimes it's small mundane joys, but I think all of that is kind of the reply, as well as the step before, just in terms of coming to terms with and acknowledging and still learning about it, which the collection doesn't do all of that and isn't just done, I think that's something, the collection is the first step, and it's something I'm still working through in my writing.
So I could talk a little bit about sort of the ways that I think about writing as a response to, or a relieving of loss and suffering. I mean, one thing, right, is that very simply, it's just a constructive act, right? So when you're writing about something, particularly something that might be difficult, grief or sadness or loss, you're making something out of that experience, right? And so you're taking an experience which is often about a kind of stripping away, or a kind of violence, or a kind of loss, and it's constitutive, right? You're building something out of that, and I do think that there's something important and really significant about that. I also think that the other thing that art can do is it can make visible histories and losses and violences that often go unacknowledged, right, or often invisible, or don't make the record, right, don't make the official record of whatever constitutes history. And I think there's real power in that, and in that, the way in which art can be a kind of corrective to the limits of what we think about the record as, and what we think about as the losses that matter, or the violences that were significant, or the things that happened. And so that feels meaningful also to me, in a real sense.
I guess if I just talk about the story that I read, and there's one story in the collection that's sort of connected to it. They're a diptych, right? So the one I read a portion of is about the parents of the lost boy, and then there's a story from the lost boy's perspective in the collection. This is maybe not actually Veronica's what she's asking, but because this wasn't like my personal pain, but the idea of reliving it through remembering or imagining is something that I had to think about quite strenuously when I was deciding like how to sort of incorporate the research about the different abducted children and meld them into one story and what I would depict on the page, and how graphic I wanted to be, whether I wanted to sort of exploit that pain, if I thought that that was necessary in order for the reader to feel it, or if there were portions that I could leave to the imagination. So in the boy's story, you see him with his abductor. And I made a conscious choice to not show a sexually graphic scene of him being molested, but the story pretty much makes it clear that that is a part of his experience. And part of that reason was the research that I had to do to write those two stories. I spent a couple of years, sort of reading cases and transcripts from abducted children who had eventually been reunited with their parents and things like that. And even though it wasn't my pain, the act of researching it and reading it had me reliving it to the point where I could only, sort of do about 2 weeks of research at a time. And I just had to sort of stop emotionally, put it down for a couple of months before I could go back to it. And I know that there's this current conversation that put all the on the page so that the reader feels it and so they can identify, which I think is a valid argument, but I think that there is another argument that suggests that when we put too much pain on this page or when we are too graphic, the reader might get a different experience from the pain that we are putting on the page. So in my specific example, I realized that writing that scene about the boy's pain could have some readers identify and feel his pain, and it could have some readers be sexually titillated by his pain, and it could turn the pain into an exploitative moment, and that I did not want because I thought I was already writing about a character who was already vulnerable and who was already exploited, and I didn't want him to be further exploited on the page. So those things, I didn't want certain things to be relived. So that's how I thought about that with just those specific stories.
All right, thank you. So we have one final question from our featured students, and then we'll open up. C. Connor Sirovich holds an MFA in creative writing from Arizona State University, where he spent 2 years as the prose editor of the Hayden's Ferry Review. He is currently pursuing a PhD in English at SUNY Albany, where he's serving as editor-in-chief of Barzak magazine.
Thank you, Sky, and thank you so much, everybody. Your readings were wonderful, and your thoughts have just been fantastic. I'm extremely grateful for this. My last question is kind of straightforward. Yeah, I was going to say simple, but I don't think it's a simple question, but it is straightforward. And it's for everybody. So the last question here is, what influence do you hope that your work will have on how your readers think or talk about pain, trauma, loss, grief, and injustice on the one hand, or growth and healing on the other hand. I would love to hear your thoughts about that.
I can go first. I was like, I don't see anyone unmuting. I can go first. I mean, so my collection comes out in September. I'm super excited, but I'm also, I mean, on a very personal level, in response to that question, I hope it's not just like my 5 best friends reading the book. I hope there's wider influence there. Thinking on a wider level, I mean, one, I think I want to see more, you know, Asian American Pacific Islander voices in contemporary literature and poetry. And I'm super excited to be a part of that. I think growing up, that's not something I probably read or sought out, honestly. And I think that's really important, that I might be able to help really anyone in the diaspora, but in this case specifically, Vietnamese diaspora, so maybe Vietnamese Americans, see themselves, because I don't know if I saw myself, at least not for the longest time. And one of my MFA professors and mentors, Norman Doobie, I remember him saying, like, first year, I think, like, write the book you needed, or like write the book you always wanted growing up. And in some ways, I think I did that. I'll probably continue to keep trying to do that, but I feel like my first collection, like, that was my attempt at that for sure. Writing the book I wanted, and I know Molly mentioned earlier, right, like having a hand in shaping the narrative, right? And I feel like that's also what I'm doing as well. And then further, I guess, answer another part of your question, I think, just recognizing that, I guess, my collection, my poetry, and maybe these conversations and AAPI voices, I am talking about diaspora, so there is a lot of loss of culture, language, memory, etc. But I said this earlier, but you know, there's still joy in there too. I hope I can focus and bring more of that into my work that makes that into the world. But since my book is about kind of untangling some intergenerational familial trauma, etc. But there's still joy because I am still writing about, like, growing up, girlhood, and all the parts of that too. I hope that when people think of, I don't know, Vietnamese or American poetry or literature, they're also remembering, like, okay, there's space for joy, and like to know that that is out there, and to see that for themselves and see themselves in that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap between what I would say and what Susan had to say. I think that one of the strangest things sometimes about living with a disability is that you sometimes are living in a universe where that's not an experience that you share with anyone in your community, right? It's not an experience you share with your family necessarily. It's not an experience that you share with your friends. And it's not an experience that we see depicted in popular culture in ways that aren't about either sort of cure or inspiration, right? There's a lot of, like, you were sick and you got better narratives, and there's a lot of also, like, isn't it cool that we are watching this video of this kid with one leg make a basket? Don't you feel great about yourself and human potential? But there isn't a lot of sort of complex space to talk about the complicated history that people with disabilities share, and also the way that it collides with and informs all these other complicated pieces of your life. And so the thing I hope is that people who feel as if they have no one to be in conversation with can be in conversation with my text. And I hope that, you know, much of my work, where it departs from my own personal experience, is about the thing that I spoke about earlier, which is this idea of trying to increase visibility or sort of perform a corrective to the historical record, right? And to the parts, particularly of American history, that we don't talk about as it relates to our medical systems and our carceral system and all kinds of things like that. And so I hope that my work is the beginning of a conversation, right? Is the sort of voice in the chorus that allows other people to think, oh, there's an answering voice over there, or there's the beginning of a conversation that I now can be participatory in, even if I am alone in my most immediate space.
Well, hi, Connor Sierovich. I just wanted to say your name. When I think about what conversations I want people to have, or that I hope my work could influence about grief or loss, is that I would love it if the stories would help people to sort of recognize the uniqueness, of grief, or the individuality of that experience. I think, I don't want to generalize, but I feel that like there's so many experiences that a lot of people have that people treat as unique, right? Like graduating, getting a job, getting married, having kids, like, oh, it's a miracle, it's amazing, like it's wonderful. But then if you talk about grief or losing something or being sad, that I frequently hear like, well, yeah, everybody goes through that, right? Or sometimes people are attempting to, I guess, be supportive and sympathetic with like, oh yeah, I had that too. I felt that way too. And the conversation to me typically sounds as if it is trying to diminish or discount or co-opt, right, the person's grief, or trying to compress it, right? Sort of like saying, oh yeah, everybody has that, or I go through that too, makes it sound as if it's not unique. And maybe that's not what's meant. Maybe the person is trying to make the other person feel supportive, but support it. But there's this way of where it sort of sounds like the person is centering their own grief experience and trying to support the other person through their experience. And I think if we could just like acknowledge, like, yes, at some point in time, everyone will die, and most people will have experienced some form of grief or some sort of loss, that what you're feeling is what you're feeling. You have the right to feel it. You have the right to feel it in whatever way you choose to feel it or display it or present it. And you have the right to feel it for as long as you wish to feel it, right? So there are people say, well, they must not have been that sad because they went to the funeral on Monday and here they are posting XYZ on Facebook, on or they're not wearing black, or ways in which we try to sort of like corral people's feelings of grief, loss, and sadness. And I think if the stories will just kind of help people feel this, but we all feel this uniquely and individually, I would be very happy with that.
Thank you so much. So we have a little time for audience questions. There have been some in the chat. Ed is going to be our moderator, and then I will close things out with an exciting slideshow. I know many of my Rensselaer students are waiting to see the results of the McKinney Awards. So we'll close out the evening with that after some Q&A.
All right, thanks, Sky, and thanks everybody. We've been getting some great questions in the chat, and I think the first person who has expressed a desire to sort of ask her own question is Shannon Palmo. You can unmute and ask your question of the panel.
Hi guys, thanks for coming. I left my nice 300 level class, which we're debating. It should be called risky writing. So I have one question with a follow-up, but it's, do you recommend writing as an outlet for someone experienced grief, loss, and trauma? And how can writing help with mental health, especially during the weird times we live in?
I guess I would say that I recommend anything you find comforting that is not deeply unhealthy as an outlet for grief, loss, and trauma. And if putting thoughts into language and showing your thinking on the page and spending time with language in that way feels healthy for you, then I think that's wonderful. And I think it's certainly it's one thing that artistic practice can do. I think we talked a little bit about this question in some of our earlier question and answers, and talking about sort of how we see writing as responding to loss or to grief. But I certainly think that being able to make something in the face of difficulty, or make something out of a loss or a grief, can be really meaningful. And certainly, though I don't always find that I'm able to write in times of grief, I do always find that I'm able to go to other books, and to read work from other writers, and that is a huge gift and pleasure for me. And I feel so grateful always, to be a reader as much as I am a writer. And I think never more so than when I'm struggling.
I think the only thing I would add, yes, to everything Molly said. And then I guess I would add, if you're someone who considers yourself a writer, you write a lot, it's okay if how you want to process grief or loss, whatever it is, isn't writing. I think sometimes, like, I have to remind myself that sometimes it's in making something that's maybe more physical, right? Whether it's like a zine or sketching or whatever it is. I think it's just for me, like, making and creating something, and it isn't always writing. And sometimes if I try to write, it feels a bit forced and it isn't coming, and that's okay. You can turn to reading, like Molly said, or potentially try a different artistic practice.
I don't know if I would recommend writing at that point in time with an eye towards trying to get something out of it that would eventually be publishable. But writing, for the sake of writing and expressing how you feel about something, or capturing a moment that, you just want to get it down so that you don't lose it, so that you can remember that person or that item or that thing. I think that can be really helpful, whether that is handwriting in a spiral notebook. I do a lot of handwriting as an emotional outlet, or whether that is actually on the computer screen, because the act of writing is an act that asks you to sort of be silent for a while, to concentrate and to sort of go within yourself. So there might be, it might be the only time that you are able to focus for, half an hour or an hour with your feelings. So I think that could be very helpful, but I wouldn't put the added pressure on myself when I'm doing that, of thinking that I have to make that thing beautiful, or have it make meaning, or have it be ready to be publishable.
Okay, the next question was from Christiana. I think she was willing to ask her question as well.
Hi, everyone. So my question is, I'm not really knowledgeable in terms of short stories. I'm not really knowledgeable about it. But my question was, have you ever gone against the characteristics of short stories in your writings? And if so, do you still consider it a short story? Thank you.
I can start on that one. So I think Christiana, is sort of asking about like form and maybe pushing the boundaries of form. And I do, and I think that, that all writers at some point in time, all fiction writers at some point in time should and will push the boundaries, but the thing about it is that I don't know that too many people actually know or agree what the boundaries of short fiction actually are, right? Besides that, a short story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And the beginning is not always at the beginning, the middle is not always in the middle, and the end is not always at the end. Someone could say, oh, well, it doesn't look like poetry. It's got, dialogue and narrative, but then we have flash fiction and short shorts, which can have lyrical components and can look more formally like poetry. So I think that, yes, that it's always good to sort of push the boundaries and the limits after you have defined what you think they are, and why it's worthy to push them. And I do think that it still is a short story at the end, if that's what you intended when you wrote it. I have a few stories that I use where I adopt poetic language or I use poetic forms, but I don't necessarily break the line. And of course, the short strip could be rewritten in a way that would make it look like poetry, but I still think that there's something about the narrative thread or keeping it threaded together that way, so that it still has a short story essence that makes it a short story. Flannery O'Connor said that, a writer could get away with, that you could put anything on a page that you could get away with, but that unfortunately most writers can't get away with much. So for me, I think the best definition of a short story and its characteristics, that's the most helpful, and that will allow the writer to have or define whatever boundaries he, she, or they want to, is something that John LaRue said when I was an undergrad at Stanford. Probably Ed probably heard it too, right? He said, a short story is a moment in time from which nothing will ever be the same. And that's the only definition I've ever used for what actually makes and defines a short story.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I think we have, there are a bunch more questions, but I know we have time. We have the slideshow. So maybe, well, I'll ask one more question that was put into the chat. Let me just find it here. It was about when you knew you had a knack for writing. And I know that's a question that could go for a long time, but it might be a nice way to end if we can move through it without, I know that story can go on for a while, but when was that first moment when you understood you had a knack for writing? And then we can move to the slideshow perhaps. But thank you for all the questions in the chat. I'm sorry we didn't have time for all of them, but they're all wonderful.
Okay, I'll be really fast. I haven't had a chance to think about this, so in the future I might change my answer if I were asked this again. I think I've been writing most of my life. I thought I was going to be a novelist because that's what I read growing up. And I wrote short stories. I think the first time, and this is more about external validation, I think is how I'm answering this. The first time I really shared writing and got praise or good feedback from it was in middle school when I took my first intro to creative writing class and actually attempted to share my writing with others and realized, oh, okay, like I'm not too bad at this. Like, where might this go? And I'll end it there.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to have been, I have parents who are also writers, although they are novelists, and they like to joke that the fact that I'm a poet, I'm a nonfiction writer, is my small rebellion. So I'm doing a slightly different thing. But like Susan, I have been writing for most of my life, so early, in fact, that I before I could physically hold a pen, I used to wake my parents up in the middle of the night and make them take dictation for whatever crazy thing I just had to have them write down. They were very lovely and understanding. And I think, I can't pinpoint a single time when I knew I had a knack for it, but I will just say that it is the only thing I have loved deeply that something else hasn't come along to sort of, that I've loved more, that my attention has gone away from. And it's the oldest constant in my life. And I feel really lucky that now I get to make my life and my career with the oldest constant in my life.
That is like a super hard question. Like I'm sitting here feeling like the little cartoon when your mind is born, it's like a little cloud, like, psh, like, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I can answer like when I knew it was like the thing that I had to do. Like, I just, I started writing in elementary school, and then I like always kept doing it. I used to take all these little summer jobs in Brooklyn, or when I would come back from college, like work in temp agencies. And whenever, like, I try to do whatever they wanted me to do, like really fast, so I could like write on the side, like in the breaks and like on the envelopes and things like that. That doesn't mean I had a knack for it. That just meant that it was like the driving force in my life, like a thing that I have to do so that my world makes sense. But I think I don't actually know. Like, maybe I still don't know if I have a knack for it. Like, I know I like to do it. I know I'm gonna do it because I can't do anything else. I'm very lucky that some people like it and they pay me for it and accept it. But gosh, I have no idea if I have a knack for it, because I could be really bad at it and I would keep doing it because I can't like not do it. So now I'm like all like befuddled and flustered because maybe I don't have a knack. I don't know.
I feel like I want to change my answer now to like what they said.
So I just think, thanks, Ed, for choosing that last question. What a perfect way to end, with writerly doubt and persistence, because that is why we're all here today. So what I would love is for everyone to unmute and all 70 of us to applaud these amazing panelists and this wonderful afternoon we've spent together loudly. And I will put up the slideshow.
Yeah.